Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. New York-born Paul Levinson might need no introduction. He's an author, singer, songwriter, producer, and professor of communications and media studies at Fordham University. Paul's novels, fiction, and nonfiction works have been translated into many languages. He's quoted frequently, has been interviewed over 500 times, and he has several podcasts and blogs. So why am I talking to Paul today? Since I believe the bulk of his interviews over the years have been about his written work, media, news events, and popular culture, we're going to focus primarily on the music side of his life. Going back to the late 60s, Paul was a budding songwriter, singer, and record producer with recordings by the Vogues, Jimmy Clanton of Venus and Blue Jeans fame, and Ellie Greenwich, to name a few. In the late 60s, he was a member of the Other Voices, and then in 1972, Paul was the main singer, writer, and producer of the album Twice Upon a Rhyme, which is the first time Mr. Levinson came up on my radar. In 2010 came the album Spun Dreams by Paul and the New Outlook, and in 2020, Paul released his latest album, Welcome Up, Songs of Space and Time. Well, welcome, Paul.
Delighted to be here.
I'm all talked out now.
Well, great. I'll just start talking.
Yeah, if you could just carry on. Well, take us back to the beginning. So you were born in the Bronx?
That's right. I was born in the Bronx. In case anybody's interested, I'm not sure if the hospital is still there, but there was a hospital on Tremont Avenue, and that's where I was born. Actually, though, Tremont Avenue is one train stop south of Fordham Road, which is where Fordham University is. So I sort of interestingly, I came back to pretty much the place I was born when I came back to Fordham University.
You came back to your roots. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, literally. There you go. Well, talk a little bit about some fond childhood memories. Uh,
Well, actually, one of my fondest memories, apropos of that area, there's a place called Poe Park, which has always been of great interest to me. Edgar Allan Poe actually did live there for a whole bunch of years, and it's within walking distance to Fordham University. One of the things, though, that we used to do at Poe Park, I used to go there with my friends, all of whom sang in one way or another. A couple of people played guitar, and we would actually sing either folk songs. Occasionally, we'd get booed because we would sing like a rock and roll song. And the crowd expected us to be another Kingston trio, but
yeah, that was taboo. Yeah, no.
yeah, yeah. But that's one of my favorite childhood memories. The other thing that I often tell people, the two key things in the world of popular culture for me when I was a kid in the 1950s were science fiction, reading Isaac Asimov's novels and listening to Alan Freed on WINS in New York, and then Murray the K. And I remember it as clear as day listening to like "Come Go with Me," dum 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 dum, and do how right. And so for me, I've always had the kind of personality that when I really love something, pretty soon I want to do it in addition to just enjoy it and hear it and read it. So I was thinking very, very early on when I was like 9, 10, 11 years old that I was going to do something in music. And when I was in fifth grade, I formed a group
Okay.
called Little Levy and the Emeralds. And I got the idea of emeralds from diamonds, that big, 1950s group. And that was really my first, rock and roll, in this case, doo-wop group.
Did you come from a musical family?
Not really. I mean, my mother loved opera.
Okay.
My father couldn't carry a tune. I mean, very sweet man, but if you asked him to sing three notes, he'd get two of them completely wrong.
How about early on, hearing music being played in the house? You guys have a hi-fi?
Yeah, we did, and we had a record player, and because my mother loved opera, she had all kinds of operas like Traviata and stuff like that, and as soon as I could, I began buying 45s, and there was a record store within walking distance to where I lived on Allerton Avenue, and I can't remember the name of the store, but they had everything. And I remember that if you'd like to know the first record that I ever bought, it was the Silhouettes "Get a Job."
Oh,
Yes, and it was
yeah,
love the
yeah.
record. And by the way, the DJ that I most often listened to was a guy by the name of Herb Oscar Anderson, who he was not like a rock and roll DJ. He was he was like a morning disc jockey, and in many ways, having nothing to do with rock and roll, he would sing along like these, I don't know, these like I guess country and western songs. But HOA, Herb Oscar Anderson, he was the first disc jockey that I really listened to every single day.
Uh, you mentioned the silhouettes and then "Come Go With Me" earlier too. I, I guess the bebop sound it originated up there, didn't it? In your neck of the woods, the street corner singing and that kind of.
100%. In fact, I'll
Yeah.
tell you a true story. A few years later, already when I was in the group that we called the New Outlook, consisted of me, Stu Nittickman, and Ira Margolis. We were singing literally on the corner of Allerton Avenue and White Plains Road. And it's like, late in the evening, and basically a cop car pulls up, and we look at each other, oh my God. A cop gets out of the car and, like, in a gruff, like, cop way says, "What is that, doo-wop you guys are singing?" I didn't know what to say. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you were a little bit off in that high note. Let me show you how it's done." And he began singing with us, and we sang for a couple of hours with that police officer right there on the corner. Some of the best harmony I ever did.
Oh, that's funny. Would you like to join our group? Yeah,
That's right.
that's interesting. That's funny. Well, you mentioned some of your earlier influences. You recall on one of your first albums or that you got?
Yeah, well, I was pretty much just getting 45s, but the
Yeah.
Beatles changed so many things, and one of the things they changed for me and so many other people. Everything they did was so powerful, was so wonderful. You knew right away that you had to do more than just listen to the singles because they sounded great on everything. So the first album that I got was Meet the Beatles, and then after that I began getting Simon and Garfunkel albums, Dylan albums. But to this day, I still have all the Beatle albums that I bought. And I have to say also, though I found out years later, my girlfriend, Tina, who's now still my wife, I guess it worked out okay. She she went to England in the early 1970s and came back with different versions of Beatle albums, like a different version of Revolver. And I remember thinking, wow, the British versions are better than our versions because they have everything that the American versions have. But they also have a couple of songs that I had heard of the songs, but they weren't on the album. And so then I began, to the extent that I could, if there was any way I could buy the British LP, I'd get it here in the United States as well.
That's very true for me in my collection too. I do prefer the British, the UK versions, the import versions to the domestic. I always have. So you're right. You're right. You're right on there. Well, what about the first instrument that you learned to play?
Well, the first instrument that I learned to play has never appeared on any of my recordings. It was the
Okay.
clarinet. And
Okay.
basically, this was how I was like in whenever, I guess, like third grade, in this public school, PS 96 in the Bronx, 10-minute walk from my house. And, everyone had to learn a musical instrument. And I have no idea what the thinking was behind this, but in those days, at least, girls learned the violin and boys learned the clarinet. So,
Okay.
so, and actually, I took clarinet lessons for a few years, and it was a lot of fun, really. And I guess looking back on it, I guess the clarinet. So this would be in the early to mid '50s, going into the late '50s. I guess Benny Goodman was
Mm.
was still on everyone's mind. I mean, he was the big recording artist before Elvis, before Frank Sinatra, back in the 1930s. So the teachers there in that school, they had Benny Goodman on their mind. Um, but I played that, and truthfully, I never played much guitar. The instrument that I played after the clarinet was a keyboard. We did have a piano in our house, and I give my parents credit for it. Again, this was my mother's influence. We had a really beautiful piano, and I pretty much learned how to play the piano myself. I mean, I'm not a concert pianist, but I learned how to play chords, and that actually is how I've written all my songs. I sit down at the piano and I begin banging out the chords. And after a while, if it sounds good, I say, "Hey, I have a song here."
Well, what about some other bands or musicians that you started getting into as a teenager?
Well, again, the Beatles changed everything,
Mm.
slightly before the Beatles, though, and continuing after the Beatles, because as I was saying, I was so interested in harmony. The Four Seasons and
Oh,
and the Beach Boys. I just loved every record that they produced, and actually, before the New Outlook, I was in another group called the Transits, as in the Transit Authority, and we were just an all a cappella group, and we sang Four Seasons songs and Beach Boy songs, and even eventually Beatles songs. But then once the Beatles hit, and the British invasion, it was a very real thing. And on the one hand, who likes being invaded in general? But this was a great invasion, and I was a fan of virtually every single group. The Dave Clark Five, always was sort of criticized as being, Beatles copycats, but they had a pretty good sound of their own. The Searchers, were a great early group. And then as, things began developing, the Kinks, the Zombies, the Rolling Stones, by the way, I remember I was going out with a girl then, and we went out once and it worked out pretty well, but then we had an argument. She was saying she thought the Rolling Stones were too scruffy, and she so I said, "Well, listen, that's what they do. It's blues."
yeah.
So, but after a while, there were American groups a little later on, like the Association, which were continuing that great harmony. But after a while, it was a combination of British groups like the Beatles and the Stones. And then, as I mentioned, Simon and Garfunkel, Bob Dylan, um, who wrote The Bright Elusive Butterfly of Love? Bob Lind is his name,
Bob
maybe.
Lynch, yeah,
Yeah,
Bob.
so that he was and all those songs to me just that again, they had beautiful harmony in the case of Simon and Garfunkel, and they had spectacular lyrics. And that's the other thing. As I began writing songs myself, I often wrote music and lyrics, but I also did just a lot of lyric writing, and that became one of the main things that I did.
Yeah. Speaking of that, he had a very prolific output, some 100 songs during that period, the late 60s, early 70s. Who were some of the artists and producers that you worked with?
Well, you mentioned one in my introduction, the late Ellie Greenwich, and actually, so the same group that we used to sing in Poe Park that I mentioned, the New Outlook, Stu Nidickman, Ira Margolis, and me. Stu usually singing lead, me singing high harmony, Ira singing low harmony, and Stu strumming a guitar. Well, Poe Park in the Bronx wasn't the only place that we sang in. And on one Sunday, early afternoon, we went downtown to Central Park.
Okay.
And this is like almost like a story, out of somebody who's writing a book about this. It was such a perfect day. And it was a beautiful day. And, we're standing there singing songs, and all these beautiful girls are coming by and listening. And then a couple, a guy and a woman, come by, and they stand there and they're listening to us, and they introduce themselves to us. And one of them is Ellie Greenwich, and the other is the guy by the name of Mike Rashkow. And basically, Ellie Greenwich had been married to Jeff Barry, and they had produced a lot of songs. They had worked with Phil Spector, writing and helping him produce some of his songs. They went on and did some of Neil Diamond's songs. Then they got divorced, and then Ellie was on her own, and then she got involved with Mike Rashkow. They had formed a new production company called Piney Wood Productions. And they said, hey, we like the way you sound. How about we take you into a studio, record, demos of some of these things? And we were singing songs that we had written pretty much. And, we said, well, sure. And that led to us being signed to Atlantic Records. And then before too long, they changed our name, which I was never happy about, but what are you going to do? I came up with the name The New Outlook. I guess Mike Rashkow came up with the name The Other Voices. But on the other hand, we did have a contract with Atlantic Records, and we went into the studio, and we recorded 3 songs. One of them was May My Heart Be Cast into Stone. And the songwriters there had done a lot of work with Bob Crewe and the Four Seasons.
Oh,
So it's a great song. Another song was called No Olympian Height, written by a guy by the name of Brute Force. That's his nom de plume. And he was a complete lunatic. It's a really beautiful song. George Harrison likes some of his music, and he recorded a couple of songs for Apple Records in its early days. Yeah,
that's where I remembered him from. Yes, yes.
that's right. And then the third song was a song called Hung Up on Love. And that song was, I wrote the lyrics, and I gave them to Mikey Harris, who was Mike Rashkow's wife, and she wrote that song. So we recorded those 3 songs. And those 3 songs, I think, probably sold about 3.5 records, as far as, what impact, the songs had. But it still was a really exciting thing. I think they hired an arranger by the name of Hutch Davies or something like that. That's pretty close to his name. He really gave it all 3 songs, a full orchestral arrangement. And the record was released on Atlantic Records, 2 singles. But as I said, sadly, the only people who knew about it were me, my girlfriend, and my aunt. That was basically it.
Well, years later, I heard that song on that various artists compilation, and I tend to like the B-sides of the singles better. For the most part, a lot of times it's like the record company or the producers that are pushing the A side, but then it's the artist that writes the better track for me on the B side. But it's a real nice sunshiny pop track, and you guys harmonize real well on that. Hung Up on Love.
Thanks. Yeah, we had a good time doing it, and I got a chance to do my falsetto bit and some other harmony. But I'll tell you a little secret about that. Stu Nidickman, to this day, and we're still in touch, is furious about that recording, and I don't blame him, because listen to this: we're in there recording, And Mike Rashkow was saying to Stu, I just don't like, you're not singing it the right way. I mean, it's on key. You need to do this. And finally he says, look, let me show you. And he goes in there, Mike Rashkow, and lays down the lead vocal. I don't know why I'm laughing. I mean, Stu to this day is upset about this. And then he's listening back to it, Mike Rashkow in the control room. And I'm standing there, Ira's standing there, Stu's standing there, there's an engineer there, Ellie Greenwich is there. And Mike says, I don't know, is it just me? I think my version is better than Stu's. Maybe we should go with that. And Ellie Greenwich rolls her eyes, and Stu can't believe his ears. And I start saying, Mike, you're not part of the group. It doesn't matter, he said. I sound better. We don't have time for this. And so the lead vocal, walked out into the world. That's not Stu singing. That's Mike Rashkow singing.
Man, really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a little nice side story there, and maybe a lot of people didn't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. The interesting things that go on during recording sessions. I have to ask you about this. Okay, you mentioned Murray the K earlier. Talk about your work as radio producer with Murray the K and Wolfman Jack. I want to hear some interesting stories there.
All right. So here, basically, the prelude to the story, because the Village Voice, the late Village Voice, this newspaper in New York City, plays a major role in the Murray the K story. So the prelude to the Murray the K story is there is a rock critic by the name of Robert Christgau, who I consider like the most dyspeptic, negative critic in the world. And he tore into Paul McCartney after he came out with his second album. And I was so annoyed by it, I wrote a letter to the Village Voice saying, I don't know what this guy is listening to, but it's not the same Ram or McCartney that I've been listening to. And I explained why I thought it was so good. And about a week later, I get a letter from the Village Voice, the editor, Diane Fisher, and say, hey, we really loved your letter to the editor. Would it be okay with you if we published it as an article in the Village Voice, and we'll pay you $65 for that? So I said, are you kidding? Yes.
Go ahead.
Right. So that's published. And Robert Christgau from that day on till now can't stand me. So what do you want from me? Next time, don't slam McCartney for no reason. But a little later, maybe as much as a year later, Murray the K, his trajectory, he'd been on WINS. That's where I first heard him. It was an AM station. Then, it's still in New York, he went to WOR-FM, the early breakthrough FM station in New York. And then he left New York, and he was up in Canada for a while, and he was in Washington, D.C. And on the July 4th weekend, back in 1972, WNBC, which wasn't really a music station, but the program director there had an opportunity. I guess Murray contacted him. He brought Murray in for the weekend to just basically be on like 4 or 5 hours a day and play whatever he wanted to. And I heard that, and I loved it. And I wrote, I figured, I have an in with the Village Voice. I'll write another essay. And so I send that essay into Diane Fisher. She writes back and says, thank you, we love it. Paid me another $65, publishes it. But the only thing I was a little upset about is in the little essay that I wrote, I said, look, Murray sounded great on this July 4th weekend special, but, he needs to be careful, he needs to begin playing some newer things. Otherwise, nostalgia will become a noose around Murray's neck. Okay. I thought that was a good line in the article. The Village Voice does me a favor, and they title the article Murray the K and Nostalgia's Noose. That's the title to the article. So I said, oh God, Murray the K is going to be furious. in those days, I was working in a place called the Berg Institute, part of like New York University's hospital center, and I'm there working like the afternoon or so after the article is published, and the phone rings, and to this day I have no idea how he got the number. I pick it up and I hear Familiar's voice. Hey, Paul, it's Murray. How you doing? I said, Murray the K? He said, yeah, yeah. And he basically says to me, I love the article. Thanks so much. I think you have some great ideas about music. How about you come down here to meet me tomorrow at WNBC, and we'll talk a little. And what I'm thinking of is, I need someone to help me put together tracks of music. You seem to have a really good knowledge and so on. So I went down there, and again, I quit the job that I had where Murray called me, and I worked for Murray for almost a year, putting together sets of music. And I think I sent to you, a list, my Spotify page. I still to this day like putting together playlists. So I recently did like a Law and Order playlist. I thought the law and the law went up. So, but that was actually a reflection of a playlist that I originally put together for Murray the K back in 1972. And I would give him like lists of songs, and he would give it to the NBC music librarian, and he would put together a show that way. And so I did that for a while. I should also mention that one of the songs that's on my Spun Dreams album, which is really, there are really very few new songs on the album. It was mostly older songs. It was a demo of a song I wrote for Murray called Murray the K's Back in Town.
Right.
5 long years of noise and static.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I have a poet with the name Pete Rosenthal, who had played on Twice Upon a Rhyme and was still friends. He became a dentist, believe it or not. And I think he's retired now. Yeah, it's like pulling teeth getting these dentists to play.
Right.
So basically that record is just me singing harmony, and Pete playing a couple of guitar parts. And Murray the K played that on his WNBC AM radio show. But then eventually Murray moved on. And then but one of the reasons Murray moved on is NBC had the idea they were going to hire Wolfman Jack to replace Murray. And I remember I said to the program director, I said, why replace? Have both of them. No, you don't understand. And so Wolfman Jack then hired me, and I worked with Wolfman Jack doing the same thing I did for Murray. And then when Wolfman Jack left, I wrote my third and final article for the Village Voice, Wolfman Hits the Road, Jack. And because he had left New York, but I had a lot of fun working for Wolfman too.
Yeah, you enjoyed that as well. Well, I was going to ask you, what do you think happened to Bobby Fuller?
Oh my God. Well,
Yeah, your conspiracy theory.
yeah, I think, I don't think it worked out too well for him. I mean, he had a slightly better chance than whoever was singing Indiana Wants Me, but I can't go back there, because at the end of that song, you hear like this, we're the police, you're surrounded, put your hands up or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was about that song, but I always liked it. It had a really good beat to it. Both songs, in fact. I Fought the Law and Indiana Wants Me.
Right. Well, talk about how you and Ed Fox and Peter, you mentioned Peter a little bit ago, how you guys got together.
Okay, so I'm a student at City College, and so now we're talking about the mid to late 1960s. During this time, the new outlook again is discovered by Ellie Greenwich and Mike Rashkow, signed to Atlantic Records. We do 3 recordings of 3 songs. They sell fewer than 3 records. So unsurprisingly, Atlantic Records wasn't interested in doing any other songs. I, of course, think it's their fault. They should have promoted it more. But Um, Meanwhile, I'm still at City College finishing up, and I run into this guy by the name of Bob Silver. And I had never taken a course with him, but maybe he heard me singing with the New Outlook at some event at City College. That might be how it was. And I had never, as I said, taken a course with him, so I didn't know him. He comes up to me and he says, "Hey, I really like the songs that you're singing, and I write lyrics. I'm looking for people to write music to my lyrics." And I said to him, well, "Okay." I said, "Look, I'm primarily though a lyricist. I sometimes write music to my lyrics." So we had this conversation. He says, "I tell you what, look, let me. I want you to hear the kind of thing and the kind of songs I'm writing. I am now writing some songs with a guy by the name of Ed Fox, and we have a meeting next week. Could you come down? You're available." He lives in Manhattan. I said, "Sure." And so I went down. It was actually Ed's house, and they sang some pretty good songs. They've written some really good songs together. One of the songs, I have no idea what ever happened to it. It's called "The Human Thing to Do," and I'll just, in case anybody hears this and it sounds familiar, it's like something like, "Why did I have to hurt you? It was the human thing to do. I know you'll never forgive me." Anyway, it was a pretty good song, better than the way I just sang it. So, to make a long story short, that's how Ed Fox and I met. And about a month later, I get a call from Bob Silver saying, things haven't worked out with me and Ed. And so I want to ask you again, would you be interested in writing music to my lyrics? And even though I just sang a little bit of that song, the takeaway I had when I heard the two of them and the songs they were writing is that the music was much, much better than the lyrics. The lyrics were okay, but the music was really special. So I again told Bob, I said, "Look, I'm not really just a music guy, so listen, good luck." And then I called Ed. And he said, I said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "Listen, I heard you and Bob, broke up as a songwriting team." He said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm primarily a lyricist." And I said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Maybe why don't we get together and see what we can write?" And they said, "Sure." And so I'll never forget the night I came over to his house. And this was the first song we wrote together, and still in many ways, I think our best song. And people often ask me, "Where'd you get the idea?" I don't know. All that I know is I was on the train, uh, going down from the Bronx to his house on 86th Street in Manhattan. I get out of the train and I'm walking to his house, and I begin just thinking of the sun is setting,
Mhm.
and of course it's the evening, but there was something really nice and beautiful about the sun setting, obviously. And wouldn't it be nice if we could have it in the morning? In other words, there's like so much hustle and bustle, and you wake up like an alarm clock usually wakes you up. It's noisy. You're under pressure. You have to get to a place at a certain time. You're going to work. You don't want to be late. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have some of that peace and quiet in the morning? And I get up to Ed's house, and Ed's like fiddling around on the piano playing something. He said, "Do you have any lyrics? I mean, I know you just came over here." And I just blurted out, I said, "Yeah, I sort of came up with this. I don't know, maybe it's a good title for a song, Looking for Sunsets in the Early Morning."
Yeah.
And we sat, that hour and wrote that song.
Okay.
And we wander away, the lyrics just came out, that literally in minutes, and the same with the melody and the chords. They just sat there on the piano, and after we wrote that song, we said, "Wow, I mean, this is really a great song. It's a really special song." And then we just sat down and like literally over the next couple of weeks wrote a whole bunch of songs: Gentle Blue Cherry Bell, I'm Seeing You in a Different Light, Looks Like a Night I Won't Catch Much Sleeping, Each of the songs have their own story. Rain Check, even though I wrote the lyrics, that actually was Ed's idea because he had been going shopping at a local supermarket and he wanted to buy something and they were all out of it and it was on sale. And the supermarket, the A&P, whatever, said, well, that's okay, sir. We'll give you a rain check. And then that night he said, rain check, that's a good idea for a song, right? And I said, yeah, it's a great idea for a song. And then The Llama Will Be Late This Year. That actually, I'm over Ed's house, and there we're like sitting around wondering, well, what are we going to write tonight? And I think it was like the New York Post, local New York tabloid, and there's an article there, and it basically says the llama will be late this year. That's basically the headline of the article. And it tells the story the Dalai Lama is like making a world trip, but he's not feeling that well. So he's going to delay, so he's going to be late this year. And then I look at each other and said, yes, that's a great title for a song. And so again, I sat down at the piano and I wrote the lyrics.
I was going to say, I like that in the song and trying to explain that to somebody. No, it's not the animal. No, it's not. Yeah. That's I like that. But you just hit on two or three songs I was going to mention, my favorites off of the album. Yes. Let me ask you first. Did you and Ed set up the Happy Sad label primarily to release Twice Upon a Rhyme?
Yes, here basically is the whole story behind that. First of all, I'm an incredibly impatient person. So, I was one of the happiest people in the world, just skipping ahead decades when the Kindle became available. And even though I had already been published by major science fiction publishers, I could basically write a novel and basically publish it the instant it was finished. And that's the way I was with my music. So what happened with Twice Upon a Rhyme is we went into, we recorded it in a variety of studios. The first studio was A1 Studio up on the West 70s in New York City. Herb Abramson, who had been one of the founders of Atlantic Records, but had been sort of pushed out by the Erdogan brothers, and Jerry Wexler also, he ran that studio. And we, recorded most of the songs there. Then we went to a studio in Brooklyn. We basically, and by the way, our key requirement in any studio was don't charge us any money. We'll give you a cut of the album.
Okay.
It almost sounds like a Ponzi scheme. But that's how we managed to do it. But though because of that, we would record it like 2-3 o'clock in the morning many times. So when we had the album fundamentally finished, we did go around, after all, we lived in Manhattan, and, we went around to a lot of different record companies and a lot of record producers. One in particular was a man by the name of Paul Gallico, Gallico, and he was not a record label, he was a producer. He'd even managed, he was a white guy, but he had even managed to produce a couple of artists for Motown, and he was a pretty important guy. And he liked some of the songs on the album. But by that point, it had been like almost a year since we'd finished recording the album. And Gallico says, I really love this. Give me some time. Weeks go by. Months go by. Maybe 5 or 6 months go by. And I look at Ed and I say, look, I can't take this anymore. This is, we got to get this out. And Ed said, so what do you want to do? So I said, hey, let's form our own record label. And we didn't really know anything. We didn't know about other garage bands or other labels. I don't think we were the first people to do this. And, as the lyricist, I came up with the name Happy Sad Records. And I said, because our songs are both happy and sad, they're combinations. I said, that's great. And my father was an attorney, and he even incorporated us, so we were formally incorporated in New York State. and doing business as Happy Sad Records. And that's how the idea of Happy Sad Records came up. And apropos my father, get again, this is like a persistent theme. Guess who paid for the production, of the actual vinyl LPs? And I still have about 100 of them, in a safe place here in my attic, by the way. But basically, Ed Fox's brother, Tom, and my father, the lawyer, they quote, loaned us, unquote, money. And that's how Twice Upon a Rhyme came to be. And again, I don't know why I'm so proud of this. Nobody was paid, anything. The violin players were like, Ed taught in a school called Quintano's School for Young Professionals here in New York. And that's how we met Israel Ashkenazi, who played violin. Same for this guy, Brian, a trumpet player. And, Cyril Penn was actually a friend of Stu Nidickman. And even though Stu had not really nothing to do with the album, I was still friends with Cyril Penn and his wife. And I knew that he played the recorder. So I got him to come in and play the recorder. I think on one of the songs, the sort of the bongos in the end of Looks Like a Night I Will Catch Much Sleep. And yeah. I'm not exaggerating. That was like some guy. I went out into the lobby of the hotel in which the A1 studio was, and a guy walked in carrying bongos. I didn't know him from Adam. I said, hey, look, I'm sorry to bother you. We're right in the middle of recording something. We need someone to sit down, play some bongos. We can't pay you anything. We'll give you credit for it. The guy said, sure. And he comes in and he sits down, great bongo player. So that's how we put everything together.
Have you heard in recent years or after that from any of these other musicians that you had work with you on there?
Listen, I try periodically to track people down, but the only person that I've been in touch with is Pete Rosenthal. And he's an interesting story. He was in a class in the Bronx High School of Science with my wife, Tina Vozick. And he was part of a group called Monday's Children. And this was before I started working with Ed. And Monday's Children was sort of like a mamas and papas kind of group. Stu Nidickman and I had written a song, If Leaves Fall Tomorrow, and we basically went into a studio and produced a pretty good demo of If Leaves Fall Tomorrow. And that's how I met Pete Rosenthal, and nothing much came of that. But when we went in to record Twice Upon a Rhyme, and by the way, remind me to tell you about Don Frankel, because I am very much in touch with him. We got a group of musicians, including Don Frankel, Alan Fuhrer, Jay Sackett, and they may have had a guitarist, but I said to Ed, look, I know this fabulous guitarist, Pete Rosenthal, and he's also the kind of guitarist would hear a song, and like after 5 seconds, he'd be able to come up with a great riff. So it was just fabulous, sitting there working with him. And so that's how Pete got involved in the album. We did fall out of touch to some extent, but I did getting back to my science fiction, I was on a show on Fox News talking about what the new millennium will bring. And the show was in 2000. And Pete had that show on his television set and sees me and recognizes me. Tracks me down, gets my email, and that's when we got back in touch. But I do want to mention Don Frankel, or I still think of him as Donnie Frankel. He played accordion and keyboard on most of the songs on Twice Upon a Rhyme. And he went out to California, and he got in touch with me about 10 to 15 years ago. And now we're in frequent touch. He actually does commercials now. He plays Bill Clinton, in spoofs. He looks and sounds like Bill Clinton. He also is able to if the part calls for like some country hick playing banjo, I mean, Don Franco, born in Brooklyn, but somehow he's able to do the country hick thing. So he's having a great time, and I'm delighted that we're still in touch. But I should mention, as long as we're on that subject, I was in touch with Boris Midney not that long ago. He's still okay. He has a fascinating story. I can't remember how we got introduced. He basically was a Russian living in the Soviet Union. And I don't think he'll mind my saying this after all these years. He slept with Khrushchev's secretary. And then they found out about it. And he was like a pretty famous Russian jazz musician, but he had to leave the country.
Yeah, he did.
I don't know. You can't make this stuff up. So he was, here in New York, trying to make it, more as a rock musician. And so I brought him in, apropos clarinet, as I was saying earlier, but he was a professional clarinet player, and I learned to learn that beautiful clarinet that's Boris Midney playing. He was also one of these people. He was like Paul McCartney in the sense, any instrument that you needed somebody to play on. Oh, where's our drummer? He's late. Boris is in the studio playing clarinet. I'll do the drum. Don't worry. And he goes and does a good drum.
Wow. Okay. Well, here's my comments on a few of the songs you've already hit on a few here anyway. The opening track, Today Is Just Like You, sunny pop song, reminds me a little bit of Lovin' Spoonful, which a few of the other songs do. Lovin' Spoonful with horns, let's put it that way.
Yes. And well, the truth is, at the end, the Loving Spoonful did use some full orchestration. I can't remember what the song was, but it was pretty much the last song they recorded, and it's John Sebastian singing with the whole orchestra. But that's right, yes, and that I wrote that song. It's definitely a Lovin' Spoonful influence song. By the way, that is my most listened to song on Spotify by a mile. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really nice track. And then of course you mentioned earlier Looking for Sunsets. Really nice song. I don't know what else I could say about that one, but and I like the concept behind it, what you came up with. And then one you just brought up, Learn to Learn. That almost reminds me of an early Chicago type song,
I think you're completely right. And those arrangements, Ed and I talked about them, and we both sort of saw this as it almost, when it's just played on the piano, that playing the piano and me singing it, it almost sounds like a lounge song. But we pretty quickly thought of bringing in those horns and all those flourishes. As a lyricist, by the way, that is one of my favorite lines that I came up with. My world is cardboard when it rains. I think that's a really good line. My world is cardboard when it rains.
Yeah.
So I had a good time doing that.
Yeah. Well, and then the other one that you brought up a little bit ago, Rain Check. Nice chorus in that one, and the chord changes I like.
Yeah, I think I did a fine job, writing that, and I also like the production. Of that song.
Well produced. And another one, I think one of my favorites, if not my favorite on the whole album, You Are Everywhere.
Okay. Let me tell you how that song came to be. And unfortunately, I haven't been in touch with them for years. Well before I even met Ed Fox. And I can't recall how we got in touch, but somebody put me in touch with a guy living in the Bronx whose name was Danny Kaley, Kaley. And I had more experience than he had. I don't think he'd ever been in a studio, at that point. And he, wrote words and music, but he also was more interested in the music than the words. So it was a good match, him and I. And my girlfriend back then, a girl by the name of Judy, we had just broken up, and I was feeling lonely and melancholy. And I pretty much sat down and wrote the lyrics without any music. That's how that song happened. Gave them to Danny, and like the next day he called me and said, "Hey, come over here. I wrote this music." And that song, if I'm not mistaken, is the oldest song on Twice Upon a Rhyme. It had been written. I think the years are on the album, maybe like 1966 or something like that, 67. And I want to give Ed Fox credit because Ed Fox and I basically did the album, and he was very generous when it came to those things. In other words, he didn't mind at all if the song was just written completely by me, or if I'd written the song with someone else other than him. We had other songs, by the way, and had Twice Upon a Rhyme been successful, we would have come out with a second album. But as it is, I have demos of those songs, but maybe someday I'll come out with those.
So there's still some in the vault.
Yeah.
But then the last track off of the original album I wanted to mention was "The Soft of Your Eyes." I like is that the trumpet or horn in that one? I like that.
Yes. And talking about girlfriends, "The Soft of Your Eyes" I wrote for my girlfriend Tina, who's still my wife. And I think "The Soft of Your Eyes" is the second or third most frequent track played on Spotify. And Tina always says, "I don't know what's the matter with people in the world. It should be the most frequently played track."
Yeah, I agree.
But, thanks. No, it was and I'll tell you exactly how I wrote that. One morning I woke up and, Tina's parents sadly are no longer with us, so it'll be okay if I say this. They were in Florida. I slept over Tina's house, and I woke up one morning and she was probably even sleeping. And she had a piano in her house too. And I just sat down, and again, it was like one of these 5-6 minute things, when these songs come to you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you like that. And yeah, I will say another funny thing about that. Unlike just about all the other songs where Ed Fox and I are singing harmony, I pulled a Mike Rashkow on Ed in "The Soft Your Eyes" because we were doing the harmony. He just wasn't quite hitting the notes, and I was showing him what the notes were. But to his credit, he said, "You know what? You're singing those notes, better than I am. So why don't you just overdub the thing?" So I'm doing all the harmony in that song as well as the lead vocal.
Okay, so you're like double tracked in that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then I don't know what version this is on. It may be one of the songs the additional songs that you were talking about. "Sunshine's Mine."
Okay.
That's a great, another sunny track. And you know what? The guitar reminds me of "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head."
Yeah, it's a beautiful guitar.
Yeah.
The guitarist is not, however, Pete Rosenthal. Is a guitarist we work with earlier, the New Outlook work with earlier. His name is, I've been out of touch with him for like 40, 50 years, Bob or Bobby Freeman.
Okay.
And that was a song that I wrote and, brought to Stu and Ira, and they loved it. Most of the New Outlook songs, and again, AKA the other voices, had Stu singing lead, me doing a high harmony, Ira doing a low harmony. But it was pretty clear when I sang that song, "Winds of Winter Chill," and that basically I should be the one to sing it. So we changed things up on that recording session, had me singing it. And yes, that guitar, Bobby Freeman playing a great guitar. And I'll tell you something else. I even remember the recording studio in New York. I don't think it's still around. Maybe it is. Associated Recording Studios in New York. And the thing about that studio was one of the times I was there, I see like walking at the back of the studio are Peter, Paul, and Mary. And I was
Oh,
thinking, my God, wow. And so it's interesting because I recorded Murray the K's back in town in that studio. I recorded Sunshine Mine in that studio, and all kinds of other songs. We actually didn't go into that studio for any of the Twice Upon a Rhyme songs because, again, then we didn't want to pay anybody any money. We never had that deal with Associated.
oh, okay, okay, gotcha. Well, of course, it's another one of those stories of an album falling into obscurity, but decades later, becoming almost a cult classic. Do you remember who first contacted you about the resurgence of interest in the album?
Yes, and I remember it very well. It's my wife Tina. She was online looking at something and calls me over. This was like in the late 1990s, and what she had found was some kind of website back in the late 1990s that was selling vinyl. And she said, "Look, this website is selling a copy of Twice Upon a Rhyme." And we discovered that the website is in Japan. And not only is the website selling Twice Upon a Rhyme, there's like a little quote from a review of Twice Upon a Rhyme. And the quote was, "A lost cult classic."
Yeah.
And so I said, "Wow." And I began to look into this and discovered that there was a magazine in Japan called Record Collectors Magazine. I found out the full story later. One of the writers from the magazine who lived in Tokyo had been in San Francisco and had found a copy of Twice Upon a Rhyme in a record store out there and bought it and brought it back to Japan and loved it and listened to it and then reviewed it in this Record Collectors Magazine. To this day, the greatest number of listens that I have on all of my songs is in Japan,
Wow.
in Tokyo, all over. Not only that, there was a cafe. I think it's out of business now. I think, unfortunately, because of COVID, they couldn't, keep up their business. But it was a cafe in a park in Tokyo, and they added the Twice Upon a Rhyme, by this point reissued as a CD in Japan, as a song that they regularly played in their cafe as an album. They would play songs from the album. And on Facebook, and to this day, I have friends in Japan who are always loving anything new that I do in my music. And, some of these people go back to the 90s. That started, the whole thing. What Tina and I did is we set up a way that we could sell copies of Twice Upon a Rhyme, original sealed vinyl copies. And, when you get into the 2000s, on Facebook, we begin talking about the album. I begin talking about the album. One thing led to another. And I guess the next big thing that happened is a South Korean record company, Beatball Records,
Yes, I've heard of
contacts me, through email and says, "Hey, we'd like to come out with a CD of your album. We'll pay you X amount of money." And I say, "Absolutely, that's great." And that's, by the way, where Sunshine Mind picks up, because they asked me, when we come out with the CD, can we put a couple of bonus tracks on the album? And so I put Sunshine Mind because it felt consistent with today's Just Like You and songs that I was singing there. And that, by the way, is very important. That CD is how I got to meet Pete Fornatel, the now late disc jockey at WFUV Radio, that I wrote the story It's Real Life about.
okay.
Because So the CD comes out in 2009 in South Korea, and I get copies of it here in the United States. By this point, I'm a professor at Fordham University. I had intended, but I never got around to it until around 2011, 2012. I bring up a copy of the CD to Pete Fornatel on WFUV, and much to my delight, he is doing a set of songs about DJs and another bonus track on that album that is on the South Korean CD reissue of Twice Upon a Rhyme is Murray the K's Back in Town.
Yeah.
Pete loves the song and keeps playing that song. So that had a wonderful story. The record did so well in South Korea, it was reissued. And not only that, a Japanese company, I can't quite remember their name, maybe Vivid Records, I'm not sure of the name. They put out a CD of the record. That's probably how the cafe that I mentioned in Tokyo found out about the album, because that CD got a lot of playing, got a lot of sales. But then something really wonderful happened. A guy in England by the name of Anthony Nyland, and now we're talking about 2010. He's a long-standing fan of Twice Upon a Rhyme. He even knows about the reissues. Mm-hmm. And he says to me, sends me an email, I'm thinking of creating a new record company, Whiplash Records. And, I'd like to start, as our first release, issuing a single of your songs from the album. So could you choose 2 songs? I write back to him. And you can see, this is an example. Everybody thinks I'm a nice guy. I think I'm a nice guy too, but I'm also pretty aggressive when it comes to these things. I write back and I say, look, Anthony, I could choose 2 songs, but I don't know what your financial situation is. Why don't you put out the whole album? I think it'll sell.
Okay.
And he writes back and he says, you know what? I wanted to do that in the first place, but I was somehow almost afraid to ask you. But if you're cool with that, we'll work out a deal. And I said, yeah, I'm definitely 100% cool. So he put out the album. He remastered the album. So it has a really new, vibrant sound. That also was reissued 2 or 3 times. And of course, by then, it's really on the map. People are hearing it and conversing about it, talking about it. It's popping up on Spotify, et cetera, et cetera.
Took on a new life of its own. Yep. I find that fascinating. What were your initial thoughts about Japan, having interest? Another country like that. I mean, I find Japan is one that likes to unearth a lot of these older, cult classics. Germany is another country, and as well as Spain. They seem to, like to kind of bring these older albums back to life. What were your thoughts about that?
Well, I realized early on that here in the United States, per se, and maybe probably also in England, when Twice Upon a Rhyme was first released on Happy Sad Records, we did send it out to radio stations, but they knew that Happy Sad Records was not a real record company. And so, maybe it was played here and there a little bit, but the big stations, they weren't going to touch it. Yeah. And unfortunately, Murray the K, who might have played some songs, by then he was no longer DJing. He was doing like some special television shows and so on. But I think overseas, and the further away from the United States, the more this special effect occurred. I think it didn't matter that much. And if you were in Japan, they, of course, knew the difference between Atlantic Records, Columbia Records, and Happy Sad Records. but they didn't care, because to them, the important thing was, hey, this sounds nice. This is something we enjoy. It is a record.
Yeah.
And, and I've given that a lot of thought. And, the other part to that is, first of all, musically, I am definitely better known in Japan than I am in the United States. Maybe not in England because of Anthony Nyland's company.
Yeah.
But as a writer, not a science fiction writer, but as a scholarly writer, I'm far better known in two countries other than the United States. I mean, I'm pretty well known here, but I'm a celebrity in China and Poland. I mean, go figure. Those places paid a lot of money to be able to translate my nonfiction books into their languages. Unfortunately, I don't read a word of Polish or Chinese, so God knows what I'm saying in those books. But but that's the same effect. That's the same, like, sort of ironic twist that whether it's your music around the world or your writing around the world, different countries look at it differently. And the further away you are from your home country, the less it matters that you had a big publisher or a big record company behind you or did not have that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I've heard stories of the Japanese audiences at concerts and how enwrapped they are with Western music, and how they even when the band is just warming up, they're just enthralled, with going, that through the whole process, and taking pictures of them warming up and things like that. So yeah, that's fascinating to me, how music travels like that, all over the world. In 2010, Spun Dreams came out, and that was that basically what studio and home demos.
Right. It,
Yeah,
it, that's right. Yeah, it was basically. Remember, I said that we went in and recorded some demos for Mike Rashkow and Ellie Greenwich, and not, by the way, Hung Up on Love. That was never even done in a demo. At that point, since there was so much interest in Twice Upon a Rhyme, I went back and listened to a lot of those early demos,
yeah.
and some of them I said, "Hey, this is pretty good." Now, some of those demos are home demos, meaning we're over Ira Margolis's house. He has a reel-to-reel tape recorder from the year one, and basically the the instrumentation is Pete strumming. I'm sorry, Stu Nickman strumming guitar. Me, I'm not kidding you, playing a keyboard that I bought in a 5 and 10 Woolworth store. About the tiniest thing, and Ira playing a tambourine. Half the time, that wasn't his strong suit. And we're doing it all live and we're singing it. But some of those demos sounded, pretty good to me, and I thought the songs were pretty good. So I put them all together on Spun Dreams. And again, one of the magical things you can do nowadays, there is no vinyl of Spun Dreams, and there is no CD of Spun Dreams. It's all just digital. So I've added a couple of songs to it since 2010, including my most recent song, Pictures on the Phone, which I wrote just 2 years ago. So, but yeah, it's basically demos, mostly me singing. Occasionally it's Stu singing, but I'm singing, harmony right there with him. And, I don't think those songs they're certainly not as polished as Twice Upon a Rhyme, but even the quality of the songwriting is, I think, not quite as good as Twice Upon a Rhyme. But I think there is a lot of good stuff in there. So, I hope that people are listening to it, and I hope more people do in the future.
Well, who is or was Sundial Symphony?
Okay, Sundial Symphony is the group that Don Frankel formed with Robbie Rist. Robbie Rist from I always get mixed up. Either the Partridge Family, he's going to kill me. Who's the other singing group? No, I don't think it was the Partridge
I
Family.
think it was the Brady Bunch,
The
right?
Brady Bunch, right? Right. He
Yeah,
was cousin something on the Brady
yeah.
Bunch, right? So anyway, Robbie Rist, and Don Frankel had been friends and had been singing together. And Don Frankel again had played keyboard on Twice Upon a Rhyme, and he always loved Looking for Sunsets in the early morning, and he always liked singing it. And one day I get a call from him, whenever it was like 2012, 2013, and says, "Hey, Paul, I hope this is okay." And we've been talking a little beforehand. And by the way, nobody knows where Ed Fox is. I was out in California once. I saw him in the mid-90s. Don Frankel, who lives in California, was looking for him. Nobody can find him. We hope he's okay. Ed, if you hear this or see this, we'd love to be in
Right.
touch with you. Anyway, he said, "Look, I hope this is okay with you." I went ahead with Robbie Rist, and he told me who Robbie Rist was. And we recorded our own version of Looking for Sunsets in the Early Morning. And we even have a name for the group, Sundial Symphony. Can I play you the song now over the phone, our recording, and then let me send you, email MP3s to you or whatever? I said, sure, absolutely. He said, so you're not mad? I said, no. You'll understand this. I mean, everyone who's creative understands this. Who is ever mad when someone does something with your music or your writing? The only time you get mad is if someone does something and claims that he or she wrote it. That's something else. But I was delighted. And so I hear this. I say, wow, this is great, Donnie. And a variety of things happened with it. His son, David Frankel, is also a musician. He's in his own group. He makes some good videos. And he did a great video of Don and Robbie singing Looking for Sunsets in the early morning. Then, in addition to that, there's a company called Big Star Records that Don was and still is in touch with, and they released Looking for Sunsets in the Early Morning, I guess in 2020, as a cut on one of their albums. So a lot of good things have happened with Looking for Sunsets in the Early Morning. Sundial Symphony's recording of it. In fact, I just saw the other day a guy by the name of James Jim Prell has a podcast called The Music Authority. And he put up a link and he had a playlist. And in the playlist was Sundial Symphony version of Looking for Sunsets in the Early Morning. And I put that up on Facebook, and Don writes in, yes, it should be a number one hit already. You know what's going on.
Yeah, right. Well,
Yeah.
well, getting up to your latest album, Welcome Up, Songs of Space and Time. Did you enjoy putting together the album?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes. And that was a lot of fun too. And here's how that happened. In the summer, okay, let me back up just to one other thing before I get to this.
Sure.
I don't know the exact date. I guess maybe like 2014 or 2015. But there's always been an overlap of my science fiction and my music. And there's a science fiction convention out on Long Island in New York called LICon. And they invite me to come as a science fiction author. But the guy who's organizing the con knows about my music and says, is there any way you could do like a little concert, of your music? So again, you don't have to ask me twice. Pete Rosenthal lives on the island. So we went out there. It was a makeshift concert. Basically, we had one rehearsal beforehand. We sang a few songs. I sang a few songs. Pete sang one or two songs that he had written. His son played guitar along with Pete. I was singing. So the reason why I mentioned that is that was up online. I put it up online as this little mini concert that I did at this science fiction convention on Long Island, let's say in 2014 or 2015. So I don't know exactly where Chris Hoisington, who is responsible for Welcome Up Songs in Space and Time, first heard my music, found out about me, but he contacts me in the summer of 2019 with an email that says, hey, just, wanting to say hello to you. And I'm a big fan of yours, but in two ways. I really love your music and I love your science fiction. In particular, he mentions a novel called Borrowed Tides, which is about the first starship to Alpha Centauri. And here, let me just briefly mention, after Pete and I got back in touch in the year 2000, I had just published Borrowed Tides about the first starship to Alpha Centauri. And I said to Pete, why don't we write some songs together? Pete said, great. So I sent him 2 sets of lyrics, one of which is a song called Alpha Centauri that I wrote the lyrics to because I'm thinking about Alpha Centauri. So Chris Hoisington is saying, I love your music. I love your science fiction, especially Borrowed Tides. By the way, some people have said Borrowed Tides is my worst novel, which my response is, I don't have a worse novel. What are you talking about? And then they try to reason with me logically. Well, if you have to have a worse novel, right? I mean, no, not me. Anyhow, but I was especially happy to hear somebody really liked Borrowed Tides. And he said, look, I do a lot of things in music. I'm part of a gospel group called the McClure Brothers, my brother and I, and one other guitar player and singer. But we also have our own record label called Old Bear Records. We have our own recording studio. And, I know this is coming, out of the clear blue sky. We don't really know each other. But how would you like to come up and record an album of science fiction songs? He said, because I know that you have an interest in both. And I'm thinking very quickly. And I say, yeah, I think I can do that. Now, the truth of the matter is, at this point in the summer of 2019, I have the song I just told you about, Alpha Centauri. Also, fortunately, just a tiny digression, around 2011, somebody put me in touch with a songwriter. His name is John Anelio. And we got together and wrote a couple of songs back then. One is If I Traveled to the Past, and the other is Torsetti. I basically sent him the lyrics. He wrote that. So I'm thinking in my head, because this is how am I going to answer Chris's question? I assume you have some science fiction songs. So I'm thinking, and obviously when I'm not going to re-record a song. I mean, The Llama Will Be Late this year is almost like science fiction, but I'm not going to re-record that. So I'm thinking, okay, Alpha Centauri that I wrote with Pete. I Traveled to the Past that I wrote with John Anelio. Torsetti that I wrote with John Anelio. That's 3 songs. And then I'm thinking, and I talked to Tina, I said, look, 3 songs isn't enough for an album or even an extended EP. But you know what? I have some songs which like I started writing. I'm going to finish writing them. And Tina says to me, yeah, including a song that you never finished. You wrote this after the Sloppy Rise. You wrote a song, Hiding Behind a Raindrop, Shyly opening. It's a beautiful song, and you never finished it. So I said,
Yeah.
okay, sweetie, I'm going to finish it now.
Yeah.
So I tell Chris, yeah, I think I have about 7 or 8 songs. Chris said, great. And he said, I tell you what, do me a favor, send me any song that you have a demo of and any songs, new songs that you might be writing. And I think we'll be able to put together an album. And so obviously, if I travel to the past, Tor Satie, Alpha Centauri, they're finished. I sit down and I finish up writing that song, Hiding Behind a Raindrop. It becomes Welcome Up.
Yes.
And by the
Welcome.
way, yeah, I have a funny story to tell you about that. When I started writing the song, I just had like one verse. And I couldn't think of what to write in the second verse. And I'm downtown, I'm on the bus, I'm dozing off, and I have this daydream that Paul McCartney is on the bus. And McCartney says, hey, well, you writing anything new, man? And I said, yeah. And I sing to him that first verse. And I say, but I don't have a second verse. And McCartney says to me, what's the matter with you? The first verse is hiding behind a raindrop. The second verse could be hiding behind the same drop, right? Rain and same, they practically rhyme. I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So that's how I at least eked out that's the beginning of that second verse. But I'd written nothing more. And then I sat down, finished writing that song. Often, by the way, in songwriting, uh, I write songs where you can rhyme to a person's name. And at some point, like, I don't know, like maybe 2005, 2006, I had begun writing a lyric, but no music, to a song called Samantha. And
Okay.
basically, I had written the lyric, Samantha, can't you see? You know,
Yeah.
and I knew, okay, there's something here. Obviously, it's about a love that's not working out. And so I sat down right after I finished up Welcome Up, just sat down and wrote Samantha the rest of the lyrics and the music. And because I knew it was going to be for an album of science fiction songs, I made it about star-crossed love, but not because people are in different places, but in different alternate realities. And so, they somehow connect and they love each other, but they're not really together because they're in two different realities.
Right.
So that's
Right.
how Samantha was written. And then each of the other songs has its own story.
Yeah.
And then so this was like in the summer and the fall, and it was like one of the most exciting interludes of my life. My
Yeah.
wife and I drove up to Batavia, New York. It's in upstate New York, and they have a wonderful recording studio. And over 3 days, we went in the studio in the morning, didn't leave until the evening. We recorded all the songs on Welcome On.
Yeah. Well, tell the story of Cloudy Sunday.
Okay.
Was that an earlier song?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I'm gonna, I think the world should know this, and this sounds like slightly crazy, but look, mistakes like this happen. Um, I had written "Cloudy Sunday" before I started writing with Ed Fox, in the sort of the end of the New Outlook days, and one of the songs on Twice Upon a Rhyme is a song called "Not Yet Ready to Say Goodbye," in which I wrote the lyrics, and now a woman, back then a teenage girl by the name of Linda Kaplan, wrote the music. She went on to become an enormously successful advertising executive and even wrote some incredibly memorable jingles like I'm a Toys R Us kid. Da, ba, da, ba, da, ba.
Oh, really? Really?
That's right. This is Linda Kaplan, really a real sweetheart. And we do see each other every once in a while. So the reason why I'm mentioning her, this was around the time that I wrote Cloudy Sunday. And in this period of time, I was writing songs either totally myself or with Linda, like Not Yet Ready to Say Goodbye, or with Pete Rosenthal. As the years went by, I, oh, so the song Cloudy Sunday is written. I wrote the lyrics. And this was something where I wrote the lyrics without any music and gave the lyrics. I went into a recording studio with both Pete Rosenthal, who's going to be playing guitar, and Linda. And I recorded two demos. I recorded actually three demos of Cloudy Sunday. One was a demo of me singing it, he playing guitar. Second was a demo of Pete playing guitar, Linda Kaplan singing it. And the third was just Pete playing guitar, just the track. And, I had listened to that song, from time to time over the years. And somehow in my head, I got it jumbled up, and I thought that Pete Rosenthal had written that song.
Oh,
And so I thought, okay, this is another song I wrote with Pete Rosenthal. And later on, I had written, as I mentioned, Alpha Centauri, and also I Knew You by Heart. So I put Cloudy Sunday in the bunch of demos that I sent up to Chris Hoisington. We're looking for songs to round out the album. And he sends me an email and says, my God, this is a gorgeous song. This is so beautiful. And in fact, so much so that when we went up and recorded the song, the guy was playing drums and a little piano. When we were recording that song, I'll tell you how that was recorded, came up to me and said, Chris loves this song so much. He played it to me in the car like a month ago and said, isn't this a spectacular song? And, and I said to Chris, well, thank you, but I mean, is it really science fiction? And then we sort of both realized, well, it is, because, I Wait to Find You Gone. You can take that literally as well as figuratively. She's here, she's not here.
Yeah.
But okay, so the first thing, so then I called Pete up and I said, listen, I have great news for you. We're going to be recording 3 songs that you and I wrote on, and they're going to be on Welcome Up. We're going to be doing Alpha Centauri. We're going to be doing I Knew You by Heart, and we're going to be doing Cloudy Sunday. And Pete he's like a very laconic guy. He just says, I didn't write that song. I said, what are you talking about? You wrote the song. He said, no, I don't know if I wrote the song. I said, okay, you played guitar in the song? He said, yeah. I said, so who do you think wrote the song? He said, I don't know. I think maybe Linda Kaplan wrote the song. So I contact Linda Kaplan. She's not sure either.
Oh,
but and she basically plays the song to her husband, and it's clearly her singing on the song. And her husband says, you know what? I think you did write the song. It sounds like you've written other things that sound a little like that. So Linda Kaplan now has credit for writing the song.
Okay.
To this very day, if you woke me up in the middle of the night, I'd say, no, Pete who wrote the song. But anyway, so here's what happened. Obviously, Chris Hoisington heard the demo, and this was like one of the last songs we recorded in the Batavia studios. And I said to him, you know what? This might sound like a crazy idea. Rather than re-recording this, and my first thought was you can just use the original track and I can put my voice over it. But then I realized I'm singing on one of the tracks. Is there any way you can like add stuff to that and it'll sound like a new recording? And as I was saying that, I realized that the demo, it was obviously an MP3 recorded from a scratchy old acetate where you hear all this.
Yeah, pops and cracks, and yeah.
That's right. So I'm saying, hey, that could be the rain. If you add like some real rain effects and mixing them with that. Do you think you can do that? And this, it turns out, is one of Chris Hoisington's specialties. He loves getting like special sounds. Said, yes, we can definitely do that. And so what you are hearing on that record in Cloudy Sunday is the original track that is Pete Rosenthal playing guitar of a song that I wrote the lyrics, Linda Kaplan wrote the music. And what Chris did is a variety of things. He put in some beautiful, almost gospel-like harmonies in the background. Also put in some special rain effects. And last but not least, another little tidbit that I'm saying here for the first time. When I got the mixes of the songs, and it was the very last time in which I had anything, or I could say anything to say about make this louder, make this softer, I realized that near the end of the song, where I go, Cloudy Sunday, it needed a harmony. You needed something to go, cloudy, cloudy, cloudy Sunday, cloudy, whatever it is, just like the, two notes above it.
Yeah.
And so I said, look, Chris is okay if I put this in. And he said, I don't know, it's really late in the process. I'll ask the engineer. The engineer says, sure, get it, we'll put it in. And so that has this, at the very end of the song, the last time you hear me sing Cloudy Sunday, you hear a double harmony on top. That's me in 2019.
Oh, okay. Wow. You wouldn't know that unless you told me. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we weren't going to really talk about your written work, but did you want to briefly talk about its real life, an alternate history of the Beatles?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it is my written work, but it does have some music. And, that story began, the incident I heard about John Lennon's assassination. And, obviously anyone my age, I grew up in the 1960s. John F. Kennedy's assassination changed my life. The same with Martin Luther King's, the same with Robert F. Kennedy. So obviously I knew about assassinations, but when I heard that John Lennon had been murdered, there was something that seemed so wrong about that. I mean, obviously, rock stars have died in terrible ways. Richie Valens, the Big Bopper, Buddy Holly dying in that plane crash, Jim Croce decades later dying in a plane crash. So, I understand that happens, but for a rock star, let alone someone like John Lennon, to be murdered like that, I wasn't quite writing science fiction then, but I was saying and thinking to myself, we're living in the wrong universe. This shouldn't have happened. This is wrong. John Lennon is alive. I don't know how the hell I got stuck in this universe, but this is wrong. And, that's always, been on my mind. And, everything has good and bad consequences. One of the good consequences of the COVID lockdown is it gave me more time to do things that I'd always been thinking about doing and never quite had a chance. And I knew that I wanted to write a story because by this point I'm a science fiction writer. I've written a lot of things, some kind of alternate history story in which John Lennon hadn't been assassinated. And what then would that world be like? But the other piece of it was, as I mentioned, I knew Pete Fornatale. I was very grateful that he played songs. He played My Murray the K's Back in Town. I met him several times at several Fordham University conferences. I went up to the station, WFUV, and I felt very badly when he died. And somehow it came to me that, I'm going to write this story. And It's going to be about John Lennon and the Beatles, and it's 1996, and John Lennon is still alive, and the Beatles are still together. But it's also going to be about Pete Fornatale, who tragically died, I think it was in his 60s, I think in 2014 or 2015. And it's going to take place in 1996. That seemed like a good time to write this, because that, of course, was the time in our distorted reality when the Beatles came out with Real Love and Free as a Bird, two songs that John Lennon had written, which in the right reality, John Lennon would have been there in 1996 singing those songs with the Beatles. So that's, and not only that, I had discovered a long time ago, the original name of Real Love is Real Life. So that's, how that came to me. But yes, there is music in there. I'll just tell you briefly. I wrote the story. A student of mine from the New School for Social Research, where I was teaching back in the early 1980s, but I was still in touch with. His name is Vin Teese, Tese. He read the story and he said, "Hey, I have this internet radio station. How about I make a radio play out of it?" And I said, "Great." He said, "But who do you think should play Pete Fornatale?" And I said, "I don't know. How about me?" He said, "Really? All right, let me send you the script." And so that's how I, came to play Pete Fornatale. I've done readings of my own stories in the past, but I haven't really played a part like that. But I wanted to, actually get the music that's in the story in the actual radio play, and I got that music in a variety of ways, and I'll tell you briefly about that. One, the Bangles did a version of Yes It Is, another beautiful John Lennon song, great Beatles song, on Breakfast with the Beatles. I don't know, back in 2012. There's a recording of it on YouTube. So I wrote to the guy who does Breakfast with the Beatles, told him about it, and I said, "Is it okay with you if we use this song?" And he said, "Sure." So that's how we got that song. That's actually the Bangles singing Yes It Is. But we needed someone to sing Real Love in the story. And I had already been following Anne Reburn on Twitter and Facebook. She is a wonderful singer, and she does spectacular covers. For example, her cover of the Roy Orbison song, "Every time I in your eyes." I mean, okay, Roy Orbison's version is better, but her version is spectacular. And so, I told her about all this, and so she recorded, did all the harmonies, and Vin Teese got her the guitar work to Real Love. And then finally, at the end of the radio play, you hear "If I Traveled to the Past." That comes, of course, from the Welcome Up album. That's the song I wrote with John Anealio. And what I did there was I took the track of the song, and I heard another great group. There's a group called the 286, and the lead singer, Spencer Hannibus, that's how you pronounce his name. He also has done some really beautiful covers of both Beatles songs, Penny Lane songs, that Jeff Lynne has, done. I can't get it out of my head. Just really sounding, as good as Jeff Lynne does singing that song. And so I sent him the musical track of uh, uh, if I travel to the past, and I said, hey, I'd like you to sing this. You already have a British accent. Doesn't have to sound exactly like McCartney. I can't sing it because if I put on a British accent, it'll sound idiotic. So he said, sure. And he did that. And that's how we got that. So that's how we got the three songs,
Wow.
on that radio play. It's won an award. It won the Mary Shelley Award for
Very Shelley.
Outstanding
Yep.
Fiction. Yep.
Yep.
I've expanded it into a short novel. I may keep expanding it. With the writers' strike and the SAG after strike, this isn't the time to go shopping
All
around
right.
something. But my hope is eventually it'll get made into a television series or a movie. So it's
That would.
one of the most enjoyable things I've done.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Well, talk about what's currently going on in your life and what's on the immediate horizon.
Okay, so the newest song that I got out there is a song called Pictures on the Phone, and you can find it on Spotify, but you can also find it on TikTok. So let me just talk a little bit about that. Years ago, I can't remember how long ago, maybe, I mean, a long time ago, 15 or more years ago, there was a website called Blog Critics, and I ran into a guy by the name of Laren Q, CUE, and we sort of became friends. About 5, 6 years after that, he and his wife recorded covers of a few of the songs from Twice Upon a Rhyme. They were sort of hip hop covers of The Soft of Your Eyes and Looking for Sunsets. You can find those on YouTube. Um, he asked me to be on a show, a podcast that he has called Three Beats Later. This was maybe about a year ago.
Mhm.
And we were talking about a lot of different things. And one of the things we talked about was Welcome Up, Songs of Space and Time. And one of the things he says, I really love Cloudy Sunday. And I said,
Okay.
oh, thanks. I do too. And then pretty much about a year ago, out of the clear blue sky, he said, what do you think of this? And he sends me again this like wild hip hop, I don't even know what you would call it, uh, beat version
Very
of,
good.
of Cloudy Sunday.
Uh-huh.
You can see that on Spotify. That's all over the place. I put it out on Happy Sad Records, but about just maybe 2 months ago, someone picked it up on TikTok and it's getting thousands and thousands and thousands of hits on TikTok. And the way TikTok works, and frankly, I don't understand a lot of it, but basically, if you have a song on TikTok, and Laren had put the song up on TikTok, and then you can then send it to people, influencers, and if they
Mhm.
like it, they'll put it in their videos, and then people listen to it, and you get a huge amount of listens.
Uh-huh.
So that is going great guns. And what I decided to do is put pictures on the phone on TikTok also, and now that's getting picked up. Uh, so in terms of what's going on right now and in the future, I would say that there's more that's going to happen on TikTok. I'm beginning to discover all of these possibilities, and some of the videos are pretty nice. They're professionally done, and it's
Yeah.
just a whole new way of people listening to music. I do hope. Um, Chris Hoisington said to me about a year ago, "Hey, are you up for another album sometime?" I said, "Sure." I wrote him an email about 6 months ago saying, "Hey, I'm still up. What's up with you?" He didn't get back to me, so we'll see what happens. These things have to percolate around a little bit. But I would say right now, so we're in August 2023. I would say that by the end of 2024, there will be a new album of new songs, uh, songs like Pictures on the Phone. I've written some other songs as well, and the thing about pictures on the phone, the recording of it is something I had never done before. There's a site, I can't even remember the name of it, where I basically upload. I'm not sure what exactly I uploaded. No, as a matter of fact, I don't upload. Right. It's not music. I upload chords to the place, and then I can hit something, and it gives me like a piano, and it's playing that, and then I get the tempo of the piano, and then I can add drums, and then I can add accordion, and then I can add my voice. But that's me singing to that
Yeah.
track. That's what Pictures on the Phone is. So it's my first record produced by AI, in effect.
Artificial intelligence.
Right,
Okay.
but it's me actually singing.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun too, having your own home studio and doing that kind of
Yeah.
work too. Well, how about any plans or any thoughts about those songs that are still in the vaults? Maybe releasing those again sometime.
Yes, no, that I will do that. What I need to do um, here basically is the story of about 15 or 20 years ago. I did manage to get every single uh, acetate that I had in my possession, and since then I've pretty much put all of them into some kind of MP3 format. So yes, I am going to go over. There are probably dozens and dozens of songs that I can bring out. But then, more difficult, but what I'm going to do, there are also the songs that I wrote with Ed Fox. Uh, and I'll just give you the names of two of them. One is called Geneva. Geneva on a wistful day. I won't sing any more of that. Don't want to give too much away, but we wrote a whole song, and I have chord sheets and lyrics to that song. Then there's another song, Firefly, that Ed and I wrote. So there are a whole bunch of songs that I don't even have recordings of, but I have chord sheets of, sometimes even sheet music of. And then, in addition to that, I also started working on the same site that I just told you about with Pictures on the Phone. I wrote a song called Two in the Morning, just myself back in the 60s. It's 2 in the morning. I look at you at 2 in the morning. Anyway, so I basically, again, gave the chord sheet into that site, and I have like a piano track of that. So when I have the time, I'm going to finish producing that. But that could also go on a new album. So we'll see what happens with that.
All right, that sounds good. Well, you're a very busy person. Better to be busy than not, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you, Paul, very much for your time and for sharing so much, and for dusting off a few of those cobwebs that are upstairs. And it's fun recalling, isn't it?
It's
Going
a
back.
it's immense fun, and I
Yeah,
really appreciate that we did this, and I want to thank you because this conversation has facets and interludes that no one has ever heard of or that I've even written about before. So this is going to be something that people are going to listen to. I'm going to send it out all
yeah.
over the known and unknown universe. But I'm really glad to have been able to do this with you.
Right. Try see if you can somehow find a way to send it to alternate universes too. If
I
you
will. I definitely
right,
will.
we'll just maximize the output there.
There you go.
Yeah,
See,
but
you have the makings of a science fiction writer also.
there we go. There we go. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's what I like, is to hear unique stories and maybe things that haven't been talked about before. So that's like you said, that's going to be a very unique interest to the viewers. So I think we're going to get some good response, a good reaction. I do.
All right. Thank you
I do.
so much.
All right, all right. Thank you, Paul, and all the best to you. And as soon as I get this edited down a little bit, I will send you the link, and then
Great.
you can post it on your social and let everybody know.
And all those alternate worlds and realities.
That's right.
All right.
We're gonna reach them too.
All right.
All right.
Take, bye
Take
bye.